Hi ladies, and congratulations again on getting your first pair of pointe shoes. This is such an exciting time for every dancer, and sewing your first pair of pointe shoes can feel really daunting, but it's also fun and exciting. So this is just going to be a video to give you a breakdown of how to do that. It's probably going to take you a while to do it the first time, and that's okay. It takes a minute to get used to what you're doing and like just figuring out how everything works. And the more you do it over the years, the faster you'll get, the less stressed out you'll feel about it. So grab your shoes, grab your ribbon and your elastic and some thread and a needle, and we're gonna get started. Okay girls, the first thing you want to do is cut your elastic and your ribbons so that you can sew them correctly. So when you get your elastic, it's about this much, and all I want to do, line up the ends. So you've got a nice crease right there. Okay, so I've just folded it in half, and you're going to want to cut straight in half. Okay, you don't really need this much elastic. You're going to end up trimming it more once you attach it to your shoe, but I always start with the most, because if you stitch your elastics too tight, you want to be able to unstitch it and fix it and loosen it. But if you cut this elastic too short, and there's no going back, and it's really painful to have your elastics too tight. It cuts into your Achilles and it's not good. So always err on the side of caution and keep your elastics long so they can be adjusted if needed. So you've got your two pieces, just those are ready to go. When you go to cut your ribbon, okay, so you're going to just unroll it and do the same thing. So you're going to line up the two ends, find the middle. Doesn't have to be completely exact, but you want it to be relatively even. You're going to cut that. Better scissors than I have. Okay, so now you have two pieces, but we need 4 pieces for our shoes because you got 2 shoes. So then you're going to take each piece that you just cut and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to fold it in half, cut, fold it in half, and cut. All right, so when you finish that, you should have 4 pieces of elastic that are all the same, about the same size. A ribbon, sorry, and then 2 pieces of elastic. All right, now I've never used the stretchy ribbon before. This is my first time, but I'm already seeing that when you cut it, see how it frays? I don't know if you can see that. There, it's starting to fray. So what I always do with your parents' supervision is I always burn the ends of my ribbons. Okay, so it's, ooh, careful, that stays lit. Okay, so it's just gonna burn and melt the ends. And I like to do it on both sides. That way you don't get fray. If your parents aren't home, don't use fire. You can use clear nail polish. It does the same thing. So I just go ahead and do that with all 4 of my ribbons. Okay, so you don't need a lot of sewing equipment to sew your pointe shoes. Basically, you're gonna need a sewing needle. You can just go to Joann's or Michael's or Walmart and get one of these packs. They're pretty cheap. They have different sizes in there. If you want to use some stick pins, I'll show you how to use those in a second, but you don't have to have these. These are all things you don't have to have. You can use, oh, mine's kind of broken. You can use this, a needle threader. I did it without it, but if you have one of these, or your mom does, it can make it easier to get the thread in the needle. And then if you have a thimble, you can use a thimble. When you're sewing the elastic, sometimes it's kind of tough and it can hurt to push the needle through. So if you want to have a thimble, but to be honest, I rarely use any of these extra things. I usually just get my thread and my ribbon, my needle. Oh my gosh. You want to get, this is light pink, you can get white. You just want to get something kind of close to the color of your shoe. It's not the end of the world. If it doesn't match exactly, it's not going to show up on stage. No one's going to notice the color if your pink is slightly off. So when you thread your ribbon, thread your needle, So I just threaded it through, all right? And then you want to pull a good amount out. All right, and you're gonna rethread your needle a few times as you do this process, but I like to start with a lot so I don't have to do it right away. All right, I'm gonna cut, and then I'm just gonna knot the end. Like so. I usually actually do 2, because sometimes that knot will pull through if it's too small while you're sewing. So mine's got a little extra stuff on the end and we can just trim that off. It's not a big deal. So when you're finished, you've got 2 layers of thread, not just 1, okay? So that's how you're gonna prep your needle. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do is sew the elastic on, okay? And what you're gonna wanna do is get your shoe and take the heel part, and we're just gonna flip it inside out like this, okay? And when you sew your elastic, you can see that there's this seam that runs right down the middle. All right, our elastics are gonna go on either side of that seam. All right, so I'm trying to show you, like so. Okay, so when it's flipped the right way, it's stitched right on the inside, okay? And then we're gonna loop it. I'll show you this in a second, and we're gonna stitch the other side of that seam. All right, now you want to sew one side first, and then we're going to kind of adjust the elastic to see how much give we need on the other side. All right, so this is where if you want to use your stick pen, you can. I'll try to see if I can angle this. You guys can really see it. So if you want to take your stick pen and just put it through to hold your elastic on, you can. All right. Now what I like to do is to sew in a square around my elastic to really secure it. So I'm going to stitch across the bottom, up the side, across here, and down the other side. I mean, in a rush, you could just sew straight across. I usually, if I do that, I do 2 rows. I sew across and then I sew back. But if you don't do it tight enough, it's gonna start to unravel and pull off, and it's really annoying. And I find if you do the square, it really holds it a lot better. So, I haven't done this in a while, you guys, so bear with me if I don't do it perfect. When you sew your pointe shoes, there's a lining, okay? And then you've got the satin. So you can kind of feel that there's 2 pieces of fabric. You don't have to do this, girls, but you can try if you want to. I try to take my needle and go between the 2 pieces so that you don't see as much stitching on the outside. But if you can't, it's no big deal. So I start at this top corner. I'm trying to figure out the best way for you guys to see this. I start at this top corner. Thread it through till you get to that knot. And I like to go ahead and do several loops right here just to secure the edge. Okay, and then you're just gonna start going under and across. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go down the side first. So we're gonna go down here on the side. You just stick it under, pull it through. Stick it under, pull it through. And that's all that you do all the way around. See, I actually don't really like these because they kind of get in the way. You want to make your stitches semi-close together. You also want to make sure that you go in a little ways. Don't stitch super close to the edge of the elastic because then it's going to like fray. You want to go in a bit. And this is not a home ec project, girls. It does not need to look perfect. If it looks kind of sloppy, no one's really going to see. You just want it to be secure, and it will get easier the more you do it. So the more often you have to sew your shoes, the less thought will it require. Okay, so now I'm going across the bottom part, and as you can see, the bottom of this elastic is fraying. So you want to make sure that you stitch above where that fray is happening so that it stays. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way across the bottom here, up the side and across, and I'll come back and show you how I tie it off. Okay, so I've sewn my square. I didn't do a great job on the top because this is why you want to have a lot of thread on your needle to begin with. You don't want to have to stop, tie it off, and rethread your needle for, you know, I like to be able to finish one whole section that I'm working on without stopping. So my needle, I should have threaded it a little longer and I was running out of thread. But you want to do the stitches up here a little closer than I did. So this is all I do, and I'm not a seamstress. I don't know fancy words. I don't even know if this is the best way, but this is what I do. I got to the end, back where I started. I'm gonna thread through. Okay. Now I'm not gonna pull all the way, so I've got this little loop. And then I'm gonna tuck the needle through the loop and pull it tight, like a little knot. I'm going to do that several times. Fish it through, find your loop, thread it under, pull and tie it off. All right, do that as many times as you feel you need. I usually do it twice. I'm going to go ahead and do it 3 times since my stitching is not the greatest on this particular shoe. And then you're going to snip it off. And there you have it. Does not look perfect. Doesn't matter. And you can see, for the most part, I went underneath the lining, so you don't really see. There's a couple places, like right there, where you can see the stitching that came through, but for the most part, you don't see it. Now, it doesn't really matter, especially for your first pair, because you're probably not going to perform in this first pair of shoes. If you saw the stitching on the outside, it's not the end of the world, but this is a nicer, cleaner line if you can do it. All right. Okay, this is kind of hard to get a good angle to shoot this. So once you have your one side attached, you want to go ahead and put your shoe on your foot. I went ahead and put my toe pad in. It doesn't make a huge difference for this, but you know, if you want to just be safe on how tight your shoe feels, then you're going to take your elastic and you're going to bring it across. So this elastic goes just straight across the top of your ankle like this, and it's going to attach on the other side. Now, you want to kind of get a feel for how much elastic you need, like where you need to stitch it. You want this elastic to be snug, all right? Because this is what helps hold the back of your heel, this part of your shoe on your foot. So if it's too loose, your shoe's just gonna come off really easily. But you also don't want to make it too tight. If this elastic is way too tight and your skin is being squished, it's going to squeeze your foot in a really uncomfortable way and pull this heel in. It's not going to feel good. So you don't want this to be uncomfortable. This is why you want to, especially the first time you sew your shoes, you want to leave room for error by keeping the elastic long. So I'm going to feel out kind of where I think I need to stitch it, so I see how much elastic I'm pulling across. I kind of just mark with my finger where I'm going to do that, take the shoe off, and then I'm just going to flip the inside of my heel again, get my straight pin. Okay, so there's kind of where I marked. It's not an exact, it's not the end of the world. I'm gonna loop it around to where I think I want it, and I'm gonna go ahead and pin it. Now, if you want to, you can put your shoe back on with the elastic pinned here and see how it feels. And see how I have all this extra flap. I'm gonna leave that for now. Okay, it's gonna get cut off, but we're gonna leave it for now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and do what I did before, but I'm gonna start stitching straight across the top, all right? And just stop there. and put the shoe back on, feel if it feels too loose or too tight, and then adjust it. Because if you have to rip out the seams and start over, it's a lot easier to just rip out one row than ripping out that entire square, especially when you're first learning and doing your shoes. So I'm going to stitch across, I'm going to try it on, see how it feels, and then proceed from there. Okay, once you have finished the stitch across, try your shoe back on, see how it feels. Mine felt okay. If anything, I probably could do it a little tighter, but I'm going to leave it as is for now. And since I don't need to loosen, if anything, I'm going to make it shorter, then I'm going to go ahead and trim the excess. So if you think that you have your elastic where you want it, it doesn't feel too loose, then you can go ahead and trim it. And I'm going to trim it to match the length on the other side. Like so. And now I'm just going to stitch it down to match. And the truth is, you could probably do a little shorter. You probably don't need this much in there. You could bring it up a tiny bit, but I like to have the extra just in case. One note, when you're stitching on your elastics or your ribbons, you should never stitch into this part of the shoe, okay? So right here is where the drawstring, all right? So that's the drawstring that goes, it's threaded through your shoe. It runs all the way through this piping, and if you stitch through there, then it prevents you from loosening or tightening your drawstrings. So you never want to stitch on this part. You always want to stitch on the white part, okay? So I'm going to finish this up and show you. All right, so when you're done, you should have this nice loop on the back of your shoe. This is what it looks like. It's sloppy. It's got loose threads, but it's not the end of the world. But this is what it looks like. I will say this, ladies, make sure, because I had to adjust mine, make sure that you, see, there's a center seam and then there's like outside seams on this little part, the stitching that goes down the middle. Make sure you stitch on the outside of the outside seams and don't overlap, just because if this is sewn too tight together, it's going to pinch your foot. So you want there to be some space there, okay? And then you can go ahead and stick your shoe on, see how it feels. I will say that because your shoes are brand new and this is your first pair of pointe shoes, we have not broken them in or done anything to them yet, there's a decent chance that at this point your heel is still going to slip off the back of your foot when you go like to half point, press and try to roll up or whatever. And that's just because the shank is really tight and we haven't broken it in. And so if it slips off your foot, that's probably okay. You'll see once you start dancing in the shoe if your elastic is really too loose. And when you try them on, you can kind of tell. You can tell if it's really not holding your foot kind of snug. But I would say don't go crazy making it super tight. I would say make sure it feels snug. Let's get through the first day of class, kind of breaking in your shoes a little bit and see how it goes from there. And you can always tighten them. But if your heel falls out at this point, it's probably still okay. All right, we're gonna move on to ribbons. So I like to flip my shoe inside out again because it's just easier. So on the inside of your shoe, now you've got two more seams we're looking for. You've got the seams right here on the sides, and you're gonna stitch your ribbons on the back side of that seam, so closer to the back part of your shoe. You don't want them in the front. So you're gonna take one of your ribbons, you're gonna thread your needle exactly the same way we did for the elastics, nothing changes. And what you're gonna do is you're going to, now these are, like I said, a little thicker, but what I like to do is fold the ribbon over, so you're making like a little square. I like to fold it twice so it's nice and thick, okay? And you're gonna stitch through it in a square like we did with the elastics. But you want this, and like I said, this is my first time with this, so this is thicker than it would normally be with a regular satin ribbon for a pointe shoe, so I'm kind of learning as I go. You could maybe get away with one fold, but I'm going to go ahead and do two. because if you stitch just through the ribbon as is, oftentimes, because it gets pulled, you're tying your shoe, you're dancing, this is getting pulled, where the stitching is, it will start to really like come apart. The ribbon will actually start to deconstruct a little bit, and then it's gonna you're gonna have to fix, either get new ribbons or restitch your shoes. So I just like to make sure it's got a nice thick base, and then you're going to get your straight pin and you're gonna pin it. I'm just gonna do it and then I'll show you. You're gonna pin it like this. All right, so it's the back part of your shoe. And you've got, it looks like that, okay? So once again, I can probably lower this. I'm gonna lower this a tiny bit because we don't want to stitch, like I said, into this part of our shoe if possible. Now, that part, it doesn't really matter if that gets stitched, but this top part you don't want to stitch into. So we're gonna do exactly what we did with the elastic, and I'm gonna stitch in a square across the top, down the side, bottom, and up the side again, okay? We're gonna do that on this side, and then we're gonna repeat it. You're gonna take your other ribbon, we're gonna pin it right here, and we're gonna repeat it on this side, okay? You want the flap, you want it to be like this so that the elastic's on this, the ribbon's on this side and not the other way around, okay? If that makes sense. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stitch these and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, once you have done both sides, you're done with that shoe. So this is kind of how it should look when you're done. You've got your loop in the back and you've got your ribbons on the sides stitched in nice little squares, just like that. So that's how you sew your pointe shoes. So now you're gonna do the exact same thing on your other shoe. Good luck.